My name is Ed Nardi, Chair of the Natural Resources Commission, and I'm calling this public meeting to order at 7 p.m. Tonight's NRC meeting will be a hybrid in-person and Zoom meeting. We have a microphone set up on the commission table and plans to be projected to the TV monitor. If you are presenting via Zoom, please turn on your audio and microphone when it is time for you to speak. Following the presentation by the petitioner and questions from the commission, members of the public will have the opportunity to ask questions and provide public comment. Please identify yourself with name and address for the record. You can also raise your hand from your phone by dialing *9 and use *6 to unmute. All video screens will be turned off with the exception of any commissioners attending virtually and the current petitioner. Once the commission has acted on an application, the petitioner is free to leave the meeting. In the event of any technical difficulties, all matters on the agenda that have not been heard will be automatically continued to the August 9th meeting. Please note that the meeting is being recorded. At this time, I would ask the commissioners to introduce themselves.
Bill Kameza.
Gary Kleiman.
Nick Pappas.
Thank you, guys. All right, we'll move on to the first item of the agenda, which is the approval of the April 5th, 2023 meeting minutes, both regular and executive session. I had no comments on the minutes.
I had no comment.
I did. I sent them to Karen and she said she corrected them.
Okay. All ministerial in nature. Okay, very good. If I could have a motion, Bill?
I move that we approve the minutes for April 5th, both regular and executive session as amended by Nick.
Second.
All right, it'll take the vote, Bill.
Aye.
Aye.
Nick?
Aye.
And I am an aye as well. Commissioners, any updates or comments on any matters?
Not for me.
Okay.
I had one. There was an article in the Concord Bridge Delia, about the white pond and the cyanobacteria and the possibility of pollen causing a contributor. In the article as it was presented, it seemed rather a strange comparison to Walden Pond, where they said they did a study at Walden Pond and proved that the problem was pollen, but there are no septic systems around Walden Pond. So I don't get that it's a comparable study. So I just would appreciate it if you would look into that before it goes too far.
Sure, I know. I can tell you that our consultant, Higgins Environmental, is he met, I think, with Friends of White Pond or the White Pond Task Force. I'm not sure which group it was. But he has relayed that information to us, that he is collecting pollen in the apods and that they do have a high nutrient content. I haven't seen the Concord Bridge article that compares that to Walden. And so I will take a look at that and let you know any follow up on that. And I don't know if you want to talk to John Higgins directly. I'm sure.
No, I just trust you to just make sure that it's a scientific comparison of equal to equal.
Got it. Will do.
Thank you, Nick. All right, director's update.
Just a couple of things. Warner's Pond Dam removal, the preliminary design request for proposals was issued on Monday, July 17th. Bids are due August 9th, and Ed and Bert and I, along with Paul Bohm from the Recreation Commission and the town engineer Steve Drutgren, will sit on that review panel with the plan to have somebody firm on board in September to have that work evaluated, including response to public comment and further community outreach. I hope by March, well in advance of town meeting. And I'll be working with town council to draft an article for NRC to be requesting approval from town meeting for dam removal in 2024. The Talbot Mills Dam removal, we talked about that, and there was some question, I think.
Whether it was going to happen, yes.
Yeah, there is some question about whether it's going to happen, and I did speak with Allison Field-Juma of Oars, and couple of things. So there was some question on whether they had received any grant funding. They did receive, they thought it was going to be about $1 million, as I understand it. And I may have that wrong, so don't quote me on that. Don't put that in the minutes. But they received $800,000 in the bipartisan infrastructure bill. And because it was listed as a priority project with the Department of Ecological Restoration, which is the major dam removal agency with the state, they did get ARPA funds. And so I think that there's, they don't have complete buy-in from the town on removing the dam, but the dam is privately owned. So the dam owner, nobody's interested in purchasing the dam from the dam owner, and he doesn't want the liability anymore. And so he is fully engaged with going forward with the dam removal process. They're currently in the MIPA process, and they've filed an expanded ENF for state review, and then they will go through the rest of the permitting process. So they're not as far along as I thought they were. They will then go to Concom to receive municipal approval, and they will also have to go through, other approvals with the state and presumably with Army Corps as well, certainly with the state. So the project is right now in the MIPA process, and Allison Field-Juma, who's the director of ORS, had asked whether the commission is interested in commenting on that MIPA filing, which is basically to request approval for dam removal. And, I said, I'll ask you. I think there's more value to the Warner's Pond Dam removal if that Tablet Mills Dam is removed, because it is downstream of us, and all the migratory fish.
Right.
That-
up.
Right, that is a block right now with the
Right.
Tablet Mills Dam. So that's a question for you. Comments are due August 9th. And so if you wanted me to draft a letter for signature, you could authorize me to do that tonight, and I would just do it. So, and the timing may not work.
Question? So
Yeah.
it seems to me that any removal downstream is beneficial to our town.
Correct.
Independent of what we do with Warner's Dam. Because the fish can get up.
They can get as far as that. If the Tablet Mills
Yeah.
Dam comes down, then they could get as far as Warner's Pond.
All I'm trying to do is separate any recommendation we make about what happens in Billerica from what we're doing with our dam. They're separate, totally separate, and we get benefits from the removal of the Billerica Dam.
And I think it may be wise to keep it separate. I mean,
Yes,
I don't know whether we really want to have this discussion now at the start of this meeting, but I mean, I have concerns right now about drafting a warrant article for next year, going to town meeting and asking for dam removal when it's going to get shot down. Because what I'm hearing from the public is they don't want this. I think we as a commission want to avoid seeming like we have an agenda by writing letters of support for Bill Ricca.
Yep. For sure.
I think we need to be at this moment very carefully listening to what the public is saying.
Yep.
I'm not saying that we necessarily agree with where the public is, but I think we need to do a very good job with this consultant of responding to the public comments, what we've heard. I understand the desire for recreation, but I think we need to be able to make a case for town meeting why, you're not getting the level of recreation you may be thinking you're getting if we do nothing.
Right. I think that's a,
But I just want to be mindful of that when we think about like, oh, well, let's, go for full bore, recommend for, Bill Ricca dam removal. And I don't want to seem like we have an agenda is all.
yeah. And
I
I
agree
would
with-
second that. I would second that only because I'm not aware of anything about the Bill Ricker dam
Yeah.
removal other than it's pending and it's a
Right.
potential dam removal.
Yep.
And the only other question I had on the MIPA side, do all dam removals travel through MIPA? I mean, what triggers it? So any dam
So
removal would
it's,
trigger
it's
MIPA?
for Warner's Pond, it would be the alteration of greater than an acre of,
I see. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, and that's gonna happen almost in all cases, I would think. just
right,
about.
so it's at least an expanded DNF, if not a draft EIR,
Yeah,
draft/final
yeah,
EIR.
yeah, depending on what the
Yeah.
findings are.
Right.
No.
Yes, I agree with your points, Gary. I just would dispute the point about whether or not there's a huge groundswell and the majority of the town thinks it shouldn't be removed. I don't think we have data for that. And I know you live in West Concord and you're probably hearing a lot more about that than I am on the other side of town. So I think characterizations like that aren't helpful.
Well, and I would also point out that the survey, the majority of the survey respondents favor dam removal. So I know that there is a subset of people who are,
Yeah.
Very localized.
Yeah,
right, who oppose it, and that we do need to be listening and responding.
Yep,
And that
right.
is, as you saw in the scope, that is a major part of this next phase is to be able to respond to that public comment.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I agree with everything you said, Gary, except for that one. minor-
Yeah, well, I mean, right. I should have said anecdotally what I'm hearing, but you're absolutely right. I'm hearing from neighbors in one part of town.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I would think part of the process of the consultant is to demonstrate why it's
Oh.
oh, there we go. How it's more beneficial to the town of Concord more broadly as well. You know, in terms of just Warner's Pond, it's got to have more arching effects of beneficial ecological benefit for the town in a broader sense. We've got to build that kind of broader support
Right,
through that report.
Right.
And survey.
right, for sure. So no on the letter?
I think so.
Okay, okay.
I would say, I think that leaning is correct, only because I certainly just from my position, I know nothing really about
Okay.
any of the details of the dam, other than the general perception that dam removal has broad ecological benefits, but in the specific case, I don't know.
Okay.
I don't know, Bill, do you?
That sounds fine. That sounds right to me.
Okay. Last thing is that the project across the way here, the Millbrook Terry Concord Market Developments, that permit has expired. We have still ongoing issues. So the
Really?
flood storage not being created and landscaping that has not been done. And I've had several conversations over time with the owner.
Yeah.
That have not come to fruition. So I will be issuing a violation letter requiring that he file a new notice of intent to complete the flood storage requirements and the landscaping that was approved under the prior plan, or to propose something that will meet with the commission's satisfaction. So that will be filed. I'm going to ask for it by August 30th. I'll copy you on the letter,
Is
obviously.
it substantial in terms of the work that hasn't been completed, or is it?
Well, those are substantial permit conditions.
Yeah, I'm
that
just wondering, did he stop short of?
It was, none of it was ever done. So the landscaping, there was a small portion of landscaping that was done at the front, and there was some in the landscape islands,
Yeah.
but there was a lot of mitigation planting that was supposed to be done around the new parking deck that was never done,
Okay.
as well as along the Millbrook.
Oh, okay.
So
And that affected flood storage as well?
he filled floodplain and was required by both NRC and ZBA to do compensatory
yeah,
flood
And that
storage.
didn't.
None of that happened.
Because to me, that seems like it's
Right.
significant.
Right.
Especially in these days
Is there a
of
place
flooding.
to do that? I mean, let's
So
say.
he
it's
had
all-
proposed it and it was approved to be done adjacent to Millbrook.
Mhm.
And, so the conversations that I've had with him is that, he says, I don't have to do it. And so technically, it's discretionary. The commission has the ability to say, you don't have to provide the flood storage. Not that the commission ever does say that,
Right.
but he does. But he didn't ask for that during the permitting process. So the permit's expired. You can't change conditions once it's
Set.
Yeah,
So the order of conditions is still on file with the registry of deeds, and it's not been, there's no compliance. We've never issued a certificate of compliance. Okay, so he can't sell the property.
Right.
Just be clear.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Mm,
Thanks for that update.
yeah.
All right. You good, Delia?
I am good. That's it for me. Thank you.
All right, thank you. All right, so we've got a couple of continuances. Gary, you want to take those two?
I move that we continue DEP file 137-1641, 154 Southfield Road to August 9th without discussion. Do we want to do them together? And also that we continue DEP file 137-1634, 1024 Main Street, both to the August 9th meeting without discussion.
Bill, could I have a second?
Second,
Thank you, sir. And the vote.
aye.
Aye.
Nick?
Aye.
And I am an aye as well. All right, so we'll move to our first discussion of the evening. It's Brian, you want to come up and join us at the table?
Yeah.
Happy to have you here.
Thanks.
All right, so this is the 2022 Blandings Turtle Report and request for funding, correct?
Yes.
Okay,
And I want to start out thanking the NRC. The town of Concord has been helping support our work with Blandings turtles at Great Meadows since 2003. And the NRC, I think, since 2004. So good long while. And so you guys have all received our 2022 annual report. And overall, the project's going really well. We continue to, the main work that we do at Great Meadows continues to be radio tracking a sample of adults, mostly adult females, some formerly head started juvenile turtles that are getting older, and also trapping to continue to assess the population size and demographic characteristics. And then we go out, the portion of the work that the NRC directly helps fund is having people go out every evening in June and radio track females to figure out where they're nesting, protect nests. Last year in 2022, we protected 13 nests, and this year record, we got 14 nests protected. They're almost all, well, they are all on almost all on private property, mostly in people's yards. Few nests typically on the Peter Spring field, the Como land, as Google calls it. Is that really a name? Does anybody else call it?
We call it Peter Springfield,
Yeah.
but I know that's what it says on Google.
Yeah.
That was the original grantor.
Oh,
I'm fairly
I've
sure.
seen flags on the asparagus field. Is that you?
Slides.
No, flags.
Flags, yes.
Are they turtle
Yes.
nests? too?
Yes, they are.
Oh, how
Yeah.
about that?
Yeah, so the two flags that are there this year were two turtles. And it's typical. We usually we have about 2 nests out of the 12 to 14 that we find that are on the field, but most are in people's yards.
Huh.
And they nest all along. We've never found a nest to the west of the river, even though turtles cross the river. So all the nests are to the east of the river and to the east of the Bruce Freeman Rail Trail, scattered among the neighborhoods, all the way down from the Bedford line. A few of the nests have been into Bedford,
Oh.
down over the Sleepy Hollow Cemetery.
And how do the 14 that are on private property compare to those that are, I mean, there must be a large number of nests at Great Meadows itself?
There has never been a nest on
Really?
refuge property, and simply because there is no unforested diggable upland that is not immediately adjacent to the wetlands, and Blandings turtles don't nest immediately adjacent to wetlands. So they always walk a ways away, and the only upland that Fish and Wildlife Service owns is heavily forested, so it's useless for
Yeah.
nesting.
Yeah.
And even, we've talked about in years past, the possibility, we do this elsewhere, of working with landowners to create nesting habitat, but it wouldn't be very good because that sort of pine woods that's up northeast of the impoundments right up to the Bedford line it's not all wetland, but the upland is sort of barely so. Blandings turtles really like quite well drained, dry sandy soil, which it's not really. Yeah, so they all go, every single Blandings turtle, even though at any given time, probably 90% of the population is on federal property when they're in the wetlands feeding, every single nest is outside of refuge property. And hence that's why when this has come up before, it's particularly an important issue in discussing the fate of the Bruce Freeman Rail Trail, because almost every single turtle has to cross that trail to get to a nesting site, and likewise the hatchlings from nests that we don't protect and physically move likewise has to cross the rail trail. The only exceptions to that are there are a few turtles that are usually in more swamp, and some of those come directly up to the Peter Spring field, so they don't have to cross the rail trail, but every other turtle does.
You mean the reformatory branch?
Excuse me.
Yeah.
Reformatory
Yeah.
branch,
Yeah.
yeah.
Reformatory branch, yeah. So overall, I think as of the 2022 cohort, we're still waiting on the eggs from this year to hatch. We've released 616, I think, had started juveniles into Great Meadows and a couple of surrounding wetlands. We've released now with a new crop 16 in the Brewster's Pond area and Mass Audubon and town property over by the October Farm riverfront area where some of the adults go to. So anyway, 616 total juveniles, probably at least about half of those are alive still based on the survival data we have. And even using the most conservative models we have, we estimate that if we restrict our analysis to turtles that are longer than 110 millimeters across their carapace, the reason for doing so is that's the group of turtles that was actually censused. Population was estimated in the early 1970s. Turtles smaller than that usually won't come into traps, so they're hard to count. So even though we have a bunch of juveniles that are smaller than that, if we restrict our estimates to these larger juveniles, we figure there's minimally about 300 Blanding's turtles that size and larger at Great Meadows now. And that compares to our estimate of 54 in 2004. So,
Wow.
and it's also reflected when we, a simple way to look is when we set traps out, you can simply look at the catch per unit effort of traps. So we, use a number of Blanding's turtles caught per 100 trap nights set out. And when we started, that was down around 3. And in recent years, we're up to 17, 18. We actually just finished the first day of trapping this season. We had, the 1 day's results will likely come down, but it's at 25 turtles per 100 trap nights. So turtles are, probably at least 4 times more abundant than they were, 5 times more abundant than they were.
Seems like it correlates the population and the trapping pretty closely.
And almost, when you capture turtles, the great majority of the population are young guys that we had head started. So doing well. We continue also to work with the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service on habitat enhancement. One of the things that we don't talk about too much, which is sort of a thing of omission, was when we had started Fish and Wildlife Service to help try and increase the use of the impoundments by migratory ducks, had been every year they'd been draining the impoundments, and which was not doing any favors to the Blanding's turtles and to a lot of the other wildlife there. In drought conditions like that, the turtles, especially young ones, are much more exposed to predators. So together with the state, we talked with Fish and Wildlife Service a bunch, and they dropped doing those drawdowns quite a few years ago now. So that's certainly having a positive effect. And we're also working directly with them on planting buttonbush that we grow from seed in the impoundments. And we don't have the capability to do it at massive scale, but we've now planted about 300 buttonbush in the impoundments. So at least as a proof of concept, we show that you can grow them really well. And then you have to basically get them tall enough so when you stick them in the water in the impoundments, they can stick their heads above the water, and then they do fairly well and establish themselves. And in another 20 years, then they'll presumably be fairly large buttonbush and providing a lot of good cover and habitat for juvenile Blanding's turtles, which really depend on aquatic shrub cover. And yeah, so I think that's most of it.
So, given the size of the habitat that is there at Great Meadows, have you done an estimate of, what is a healthy population of Blanding's turtle? Like, if we have 300 adults now, is that about right? Or do we want 600?
So it's not quite 300 adults because the
10
head,
centimeters.
the head starts. So for females, it's harder to know when the males, we don't see them mating, so harder to know when the males are mature. We know when the females are mature because they lay eggs. And for females at this population, that usually starts at right about 20 years of age. And the first head started turtles that we released were released in 2008. They're likely to mature maybe 3 years, just as a wild guess. Based on some work of some other people earlier than their wild counterparts, maybe starting at about 17. So in other words, pretty soon, there were very few in this first couple of years, but pretty soon we're going to be having a lot of the formerly head started ones will be adults and will be starting to nest. Our original goal had been an adult population of at least 200. So it looks like we're very well set up for that to be the case currently. So hence, and thank you, that's a good segue to an important bit. So we're now saying, we didn't, I don't think, write this in the report, but are now in discussions with the state. We're now saying that probably by 2025, so we'll do one more year, 2024, of kind of, continuing as is, but probably starting in 2025, we'll start scaling down and then pretty quickly eliminating the head starting part. And then, focusing the effort that we do just on nest protection, because we think that probably between working with Fish and Wildlife Service on habitat enhancement and just protecting nests, that would probably be enough to sustain the population at the size that it reaches. So it'll raise an interesting question because we have lots of schools and school kids
Yeah, exactly.
who are used to raising turtles from Great Meadows.
Yeah.
We raise Blanding's turtles. We also work with some other species in schools, but we raise Blanding's turtles from a couple of other populations too. But it'll be an interesting discussion because at that point, so already in terms of, larger juveniles and adults, but in a few years, if you just count adults, Great Meadows will likely be the second largest population in the Northeast.
Cool.
And so it raises the question that Great Meadows could in the future be used the same way that U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service uses the oxbow population, the largest in the Northeast, as kind of a donor population.
Yeah,
to
like a
other
nursery
sites.
almost, or
Right. So a lot those any such idea like that will require lots of buy-in and discussion with the state and with the feds because
And
Right.
last year, I remember asking if there were other areas in Concord that we could, and you said, no, this is the habitat but there must be other places where Blanding's turtles would do well
There are,
outside,
yeah.
across the state. So, yeah.
that's right. Yeah, and Concord, it's not obvious. The only other kind of separate population in that is barely in Concord that I know of is has been along can't remember the name of the brook that runs through it, but just north of 117 in the land that borders Sudbury.
Yeah.
And that's the heronry that is off.
Oh, the heron.
Excuse me.
Not
Misery?
Pantry Brook.
Pantry.
Is
No,
it?
I
No,
don't know if it's
north of 117?
Yeah, so north of 117, right? Just so most of the wetlands are actually in Sudbury, but it's right on the Concord line. And do you know the heronry? I think it's no longer
Yeah,
quite
yeah.
in existence.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So the
Right.
brook that was dammed to
Yeah.
make that heronry. So there on the Sudbury side, there had at least been a very small number of Blanding's turtles seen before.
Yeah, my son, who just graduated from college this year, was in Miss Erickson's class and did
Oh
some
my God.
that started, and he now has a degree in biology. But
There you
it,
go.
it does seem like you could engage the kids in like nest protection or other activities with
Very
them.
much so.
Yeah, or habitat.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Sure.
building.
It's just it's not quite as powerful.
Yeah,
as-
right.
So,
Yeah.
So, but it's a good problem to
Yeah.
have, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I'll also, because the commission has also helped us out with wood turtle work in Concord, so I'll also mention that, which I tend not to. So in Concord, there's one very small population entirely in Concord that we know of that's along the section of Elm Brook that runs through the Massport lands right off runway 11 and at Hanscom. And at one point, there were probably 6 or 7 adults in that population, but many of them were killed in 2016 when we had a really severe drought, and the stream Elm Brook just became a discontinuous bunch of puddles, and probably a couple of otters I've seen under there. Figured it out and just went to town on the wood turtles and painted turtles in the stream, killed a bunch of them. So 3 of the females that we were radio tracking were killed that year. So we've only in recent years, we're tracking one male there, and we've seen a juvenile that weren't able to get our hands on. So there's not much of a population there.
And that's near where these new hangars.
It's near, but it's not. So I haven't looked at it really closely. You know, so a couple of people asked me about it. My sense, you know, and I often walk there, so you know, and go up. There's some of those rocky outcrops look over there, and my sense is the area that I think the hangar work is being planned is a fair way. The wood turtles stay very close to the stream.
Mhm.
Hardly ever go more than 100 meters from the stream, so I think it's not likely to have a big effect. But it's a very small section of usable stream. And then there are also wood turtles that barely get into Concord. There's a very, very small population also that's still in existence along Fort Pond Brook, just before its confluence with Neshoba Brook. And so the work is in Acton, but it's, you know, again, right up against the Concord line. And since last year, we've been, with the state's blessing, we translocated some head-started young wood turtles from a population along the upper Charles River over to that site. We know there is at least one adult male there because we have radio on him. And about, I think this is back around 2009, we got a photo, I'm pretty sure you were copied on that way back when, that somebody took a picture of a female nesting in the Acton Water Department land, where right near where the solar array has been set up. So at least at that time, there were at least two. It's probably not much more than that. But anyway, we released some juveniles there last year and this year. And a few of those have now dispersed up along the Neshoba Brook and are right around Warner's Pond too. So it's just interesting bit in conjunction with the discussion over the Warner's Pond dam removal too. You know, not that this is a particularly consequential bit in that much bigger discussion, but I know Delia and you and I have talked about it. You know, if there is more stream channel, then wood turtles will likely use it.
Mhm.
A few wood turtles that are there will likely use that. Yeah, so that's pretty much my report, and our request is to that the NRC help fund the Blandings turtle work that we're doing at $3,000 for the year, and the wood turtle work we've asked typically for $300 just to help us with radios. So we ask that too.
The total
for a
request
total
of
of
3,300?
Yeah.
Okay.
Just a question. I mean, would it make sense in 2 or 3 years when we have a stable population of, or hopefully have a stable population of Blandings turtles, to shift resources between, you know, from Blandings towards wood turtle
I think
efforts, or?
that could be great. We actually have a project that is interesting right now. It's hard to know how effectively we're going to be able to apply the results. But what we found in working with a bunch of wood turtle populations in northeastern Massachusetts, where the species is doing poorly almost everywhere, they tend to be small, quite isolated populations, and they suffer really high predation rates. Likely, probably in that order, but we're not sure. Otter, mink, and raccoons are the most effective predators on them. And we're trying to better understand the dynamics of how the predators, find the turtles. So we actually are working with a company. We're just about to get delivery of a bunch of really good 3D printed fake wood turtles that, and then there are these cool plastic tubes that are made specifically for scent dog training that are really good at absorbing and retaining odors. So we can basically put the tubes in with live wood turtles so they smell like wood turtles too, and put those out with cameras, and also put live wood turtles out in secure cages, see who comes and messes with the wood turtles. And then some folks, because it's, as turtle populations around in North America, many of them are threatened, endangered, many are declining, and there's more attention being put to turtle conservation management. in part because in many habitats, there's the little bit of habitat that's left for the turtles is simultaneously the little bit of habitat that's left for otters and mink and raccoons. So they come into contact with one another a lot. When people try doing head starting, oftentimes, not only the juveniles, but a lot of the adults are getting killed by predators. So increasingly, I just came back from a turtle conference in Pennsylvania, and increasingly people are turning towards killing the predators, which is not something that our group has. These are native animals that all are important for our ecosystems. We have no desire to go anywhere in that direction. But one of the things that we want to take a look at is sort of weaponizing these decoy turtles, which has been tried with ravens and desert tortoises. So you basically have a pressurized canister with chili pepper oil buried underneath the thing and a little sensor. And when something shakes the decoy hard enough, it sprays chili pepper oil in their faces. So check to, and in any given area, there aren't going to be very many individuals of any of those species. So if you can get at least a few of them,
They would learn.
Yeah.
They would learn.
to get the idea that turtles are not great snacks.
Right.
At least temporarily.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah,
I mean,
that's right.
a
Learned
lot
behavior,
of
dude.
conservation is in some ways, sort of stopgap, hoping that in some future time, maybe the world could get a little bit better and there be a little bit more room for these guys.
Yeah.
So in a way, Gary, so yes, it could be, maybe next year we can I'm happy to talk a little more about wood turtles or in 2025 and look at the possibility of doing something a little more systematic for wood turtles, which were once common. Thoreau wrote about finding a bunch of wood turtles along the Assabet. So wood turtles were once common in Concord. Now they're pretty much gone.
Yeah. All right, Delia, that's and good with the budget?
Yes, so this would be a motion to fund this from the Conservation Wetlands Fund balance, which has a current balance of $105,073.16.
All right.
So I'll move that we fund from the Wetlands
Conservation Wetlands
Conservation
Fund balance.
Fund balance to the tune of $3,300 to Brian for his continued research on turtles.
And to Zoo New England.
And to New England. Right.
Yeah, there you go. Second. Thank you, Gary. And the vote, Bill?
Aye.
Gary?
Aye.
Nick?
I,
And I am an I as well. Thank you, Brian.
Thanks very
Appreciate
much.
the presentation and good luck.
Thank you.
Thanks, Brian.
Right. So for our first continuance this evening, it's a notice of intent, 90B Walden Street, DEP file 137-1644. And good evening. Who's going to take the lead this evening?
Good evening. I can do that. I have Vanessa Curran here with DCR as well. How are you all doing tonight?
Good, Carl. You got the name and for the record, name and address
Yep,
or name and
Sure.
company?
It's Carl Nielsen with TRC Companies and out of East Providence, Rhode Island,
Great. Thank you.
among other places. So I believe at the last meeting we had, we were still waiting to go through the Lincoln process. We just finished that up tonight. We were scheduled at 7:20 and they voted on it and have approved and I'm back. So they were very proud of themselves for having beat you guys. So in any case, the only issue that was really outstanding on their end is the NHESP letter that came out since the last hearing. There are, and it was mentioned in our NOI, there were 2 rare plant species, aquatic plant species that are present in Walden Pond, and the NHESP wants us to have a botanist, qualified botanist, go out to the area where the boat launch is going to be placed in the water and survey it prior to the construction or prior to the start of construction. So it's just to make sure there's no plants that are in the area. There weren't any in the area when we did the survey initially, but things can change. And so they just, if the work happens in in a year or 2 years. They just wanted to make sure that we go in and look before we proceed. And the plan would be to move those plans, not kill them.
Yeah, okay. Anything else, Carl, from your end?
No, I think the plan from Lincoln was to coordinate with you for the specific conditions that might be related to the project. I think they wanted to put in one for 80% survivorship of trees that are being replanted on a 1-to-1 basis. And they felt that it would be fine for DCR staff to report on those trees and make that determination as to whether it's surviving or not. So
After all that,
So none of the trees would be planted within Concord's jurisdiction. Those trees are all.
Oh, okay, so saves
Okay.
that. And they actually said that the NHESP issue was yours, not theirs.
Yes.
So
Yes,
And
so
you've
we
already
did include
included,
that in the order of conditions, just a finding that Natural Heritage has issued correspondence that those rare species exist, and that in order to prevent a take, that you know, go through the botanical survey. So that finding and condition are included.
Yeah,
okay.
Yeah.
And I know, Bert, you mentioned yesterday you had looked at the preliminary order conditions from Lincoln and didn't see any conflicts or
No.
anything of that nature.
no.
Okay, so good to
All
go.
good.
Okay. So I think with that, I do believe we have an order of conditions, Bill.
Yeah, I move that,
See if there's public comment.
Oh, thank you. Any public comment regarding this application? Seeing none, Bill?
so I move that we close the hearing for DEP file 137-1644-90B Walden Street. And that we issue the following findings, A, B, and C, with standard order of conditions 1 through 20 and special conditions 21 through 51.
Second.
Thank you, Gary. And we'll take the vote. Bill?
Aye.
Gary?
Aye.
Nick?
Aye.
And I am an aye as well. Thank you all. Good luck with the project.
thank you very much. Appreciate your time and efforts here, and look forward to working on the project.
Great.
Good
Bye-bye.
evening. All right, so the first new application this evening, DEP file number 137-1645, 88 Hugh Cargill Road. Applicant owner, Alan. You like, please join us. Like. Evening.
Good evening. Thank you very much for your time. I appreciate it.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Mark Warfel. I am a landscape architect with Crowley Cottrell here on Alan's behalf.
Good evening, Mark. Please.
Sure. Well, thank you very much for your time. I appreciate it. And thanks as well to Dealey and Bert for the feedback that they provided us over the past few weeks. I've been, as Mark mentioned, you know, I've engaged him and his firm to help with the plans that have been put together and submitted. And frankly, I'll turn it over to Mark since he's the landscape architect and expert to present it.
Do we want to put it
Yes,
up on
do you
the
wanna
screen? I
present
think.
those? Oh, I think I need to let you share
Mark,
screen.
do you want to put up the plan on the screen if you give you sharing?
Sure.
Yeah,
I
it might
can
be
do that.
easier for everybody to take a look at.
This is when it's nice to be able to have all this.
Oh, yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, Well, there you go.
Okay, never mind.
yeah. It's all working.
Okay. Can you all see this?
Yes.
Yeah.
Awesome. So yeah, we'll just quickly walk through the plans and talk about the project. So included in the application was the survey conducted by Stamsky and McNary, which delineates the wetland and denotes the buffer zones. It also shows the in-place erosion control for the other work that's being performed on the property. When this survey was initially done, it identified trees over 5 inches in caliper DBH. So I think it's a pretty accurate record of what is there. Moving on to our demolition plan, we've identified 9 trees and 3 stumps that we're proposing to be removed. These are all white pines, and most of them are mature in age and have started, shedding a lot of dead wood. And then the stumps that are located just within the 50-foot buffer, you pose a safety risk, I think, to people traversing the property. We've also identified that there were some invasive species within the buffer zone. So we've kind of roughly demarcated them here with the, which species we found and the methods of removal. I'd like to note that these aren't big colonies of invasive species, and so we're going to take a targeted approach, and that we're not imagining that these areas are heavily altered. So it'll be a surgical removal of the invasive species and leaving as much of the vegetation that is found in place. And through some of the existing condition photos that we included in the narrative, you can see that those include things like ferns, and there's some what we identified as some wild cherries and things of that, or choke cherries and things of that nature. I'd also like to add that we did have a letter from the wetland scientist who delineated this resource, that there was really no wetland vegetation to be found. He kind of surmised that this is an old well. It is bordered by stone walls, and the soil in the surrounding area led him to believe that there weren't any hydric soils, and that the only resource that would be present would possibly be bank resources. Also in this area, denoted by the green hatch, is just a general removal of things like deadwood. We identified some large deadwood on snagged in trees, as well as being kind of propped up against trees. And to conclude this plan, we're just proposing that any place where a tree is removed, or we remove a species, an invasive species, and the soil's disturbed, that it's lightly raked to prepare it for seeding. And we're really trying to be surgical here, to be mindful of the large number of mature trees that we're proposing remain, which to my count was upwards of 19 or 20. So I'll just move on here to our proposed mitigation plan. And to start, we've proposed a seed mix that is also included in the narrative. That is a conservation wildlife seed mix, and it's comprised of all native species to this area. Again, it's shown as this big area that will be seeded, but I think we're going to be more targeted in where there is disturbance. We are hoping to put back something better than what was there. There's a proposal for a 6-foot wood fence that runs the edge of the property and just outside the 25-foot buffer. Noted that we're proposing a 6-inch gap at the bottom of the fence for wildlife to be able to traverse, and that we're including a gate in the fence for maintenance purposes, so that there is access to the 25-foot buffer area, whether that's to maintain or to remove any invasives that might crop back in, or remove tree staking or things of that nature, but just to provide access from this property. There's also outside of the wetland buffer, we've indicated gaps in the fence for the existing trail that runs through the property to maintain access to that. And then when it comes to more of the substantial planting, we're proposing 13 trees, 9 evergreens, and 4 deciduous, all native, of course, and 42 shrubs that of various species and sizes. And the idea is to naturalize the area. And again, we're being really surgical about this because of all of these mature trees that we're working under and in, and to try to limit root zone disturbance. So I guess in summary, this proposal is really an enhancement to the wetland because it removes the invasive species that we found on site and replaces them with native planting that is both beautiful and beneficial for people and the wildlife in this area.
Thank you, Mark. All right, let's see. So in regard to the mitigation, I know there's some disconnect in terms of square footage coverage as between the 13 trees and 42 shrubs proposed that adds up to 23 or 2,400 feet versus
Right, and the,
3,600.
so probably didn't see this, it came, because I sent this out late in the day, and so a
Ah.
response came back later, so you probably haven't seen it, but the the landscape architect, so Michelle Crowley had responded to that email, Mark, which I'm sure that you saw. And her feeling was that, if you go back to the existing conditions plan, she said, there are existing trees within that area. And that's true. I think what we would like to, what I would suggest is that those be included in the consultant's sort of analysis of whether or not that full coverage is being covered with what's existing and then what is coming in as proposed.
Got it. All right, so we'll have to wait to
So,
see that analysis.
Just so I understand what you're saying,
Yeah.
you're gonna give some credit for the existing trees that are remaining within the mitigation area.
I think so.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
No,
that-
I
that-
just want to make sure. I
Right,
understand.
exactly. That's a
Because-
better way of stating it.
Yeah,
Yeah.
well, we have a pretty formulaic way of determining how much mitigation area and what plantings go there, but.
Right.
The existing trees that we're given credit for,
Yes.
to use that language, they're not invasive. They're not like Norway maples.
No,
They're
no,
like,
no,
okay.
they're oaks and
Yep.
they're mostly oaks, right?
Mostly oaks, from what
And
I
yes,
remember,
yeah.
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 So that sounds fine.
Yeah, you can't stuff it so. they're not
Right.
gonna-
So
they're not
nothing's gonna
thrive.
survive, right?
Yep,
right.
okay. Well, thank you for that.
So Mark, does that make sense to just do that analysis? Put this into the email, but the commission looks at trees at 10 foot on center and shrubs as 5 foot on center. So just to take what you have existing, amend that or include the proposed plantings and demonstrate that the coverage has been achieved. And if not, then increase the proposed number of plantings.
Yes, that's clear. Thank you.
Great, thanks.
Great.
All right. So one of the questions that has arisen is the fence in the 25 or just adjacent to the 25, part and parcel of the policy on the 50-foot no build is that there's typically no fencing in the 50. So I guess the request would be to try to move that fence from the 25 in essence to just outside the 50.
Okay. And the reason why we were thinking the 25 is because if you look at that, I mean, it's this is sort of like a convex bulge into our back. And so, if you do the 50, then it sort of separates a large part of my property from.
I mean, the other option is just to not fence this area at all. So just to not have the fence here at all, but here and here, but not have it in the buffer zone.
That's the
Because it'll
option
be
too.
fully vegetated,
Yeah.
Yeah, okay,
which should provide
Okay,
plenty of
right.
screening.
right.
If that's
So
the,
then we could still have it along the sort of.
Up to the point.
up to the 50.
Right.
Up to the
right.
50
Up
to
to
the
50.
side.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Delia, I just couldn't see what you were pointing to.
Sorry.
So the fence would stop at the 50-foot buffer. Is that what you're
on the
proposing?
property line.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So options.
Yeah, that seems like a reasonable one.
Okay,
Yeah, and we're open to that.
okay.
Great,
Yeah.
thanks.
And I think the other thought is that, placing some pheno markers at the 50, that would, is that a once a year mow? Or,
So the proposal talks about doing an annual
Yeah.
mow throughout.
This is for the 100 to 50?
No,
Because the-
it's everywhere.
Inside the 50, I thought there were gonna be plantings like shrubs. They're gonna be things that,
but they may plant some grass.
Yeah,
Right.
there's some native,
wild-
there's some
wild- wild-
wildflower mix as
Yeah.
well.
uh,
So I think typically what the commission is looking for in that, we want you to be able to weed the plantings so that they don't get overtaken by by the conservation seed mix as
Yeah.
well as the invasives. So to go in and just sort of weed around that, that's fine, but the annual mow should be in the outer buffer
Just
zone.
in the 50 to 100.
50,
Exactly,
All right,
yeah.
50
sure.
and beyond.
And then just to put pheno markers, which are just basically these aluminum, you know what
Yeah.
they are?
I do not.
No.
Okay, I was gonna say, wow,
Yeah.
nobody does. They're aluminum inserts that go in on a spike.
Okay,
And it basically will let your landscaper know, it'll be engraved annual or no mow beyond this
Okay.
point.
sure, sure, that's fine.
so they know where to stop mowing.
Right, and just space them X amount, so.
Like every 25 feet.
Yeah.
Are you
Well-
familiar with pheno markers, Mark?
I know what they are, but I do not. Well, does the commission have a requirement for spacing?
25 feet.
25 feet.
And I'm sure we have a copy of a plaque, right? That
Yeah.
says no.
So it would
No
just
way.
say no mowing beyond this point.
Yeah, okay.
And if you need a spec, I think you have, no, sorry, I can send you a spec if you need it.
Sure, we can Google it.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, Google's very handy.
And as far as invasive mitigation, do we want a narrative on that? Do we have anything filed to
We
date?
do. Yeah, no, I think the invasives narrative was sufficient.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah.
That's fine. Okay,
Yeah.
good. All right, so that box is checked.
Yeah.
All right, great. Anything else?
Just a question, trying to understand because I haven't been to the site, but this is, I understand an abandoned well. But it sounds like it
It's more
was.
than that. It's more than that. And I
Is
think that
there
the point,
water
oh yeah, there's
that's
water in it. So
actively
it's
coming out of it?
it's not a wetland. It's a wetland resource area, but it's
Yeah.
not bordering vegetated wetlands. The resource is bank, as it would be
Mhm.
around a pond. This just
Yeah.
happens to be a hard armored,
Mhm.
well or whatever. I mean, it's connected to a larger pond off property.
But I guess my question is it now, yeah, you're saying connected, is it now serving as a water source to a larger water body off property?
I think it's a dug pond that, I
Mhm.
mean, that's my guess.
So
I don't.
groundwater?
I
I
don't-
think that's in fact why they made that little cutout for my property is to access the well for the-
Mm.
whatever house preceded it, goodness knows how many decades ago.
Sure.
Yeah.
Sure.
Okay.
Okay.
Thanks.
All right. And I know there were a couple public commentary letters as well,
Mhm.
mostly dealing with trail access. I've seen that you accommodated that, but
Yep.
certainly want to go out for public comment as well.
Mhm.
Um,
Anybody in?
Sure, I'll start.
please, yeah.
Thank you. Thank you for the presentation. I'm Jeff Adams, 142 Farmers Cliff Road. And there was a letter submitted by somebody who knows a little bit more about the hydrology than I do, suggesting it is a connected well, and this little well area is connected to another water source. So I
That's
wouldn't
the
just
letter I had read.
I may have missed in Mark's presentation the discussion that a number of trees were removed prior to understanding of this being a buffer zone regulated area. And I believe that may have been discussed. I don't know if that was mentioned tonight, other than a derogatory suggestion of stumps that should be removed. But how many trees were removed in the wetlands buffer?
We believe
Without permission?
six trees.
I'm sorry,
Six.
Six, okay. And those are the stumps that you'd ideally like.
No, that's not correct. I think the stumps are old stumps and from trees that were cut down before I owned the property.
Okay. I appreciate it. I think it was Mark's comment that there are gaps in the stockade fence that's proposed on the submitted plans on the full perimeter of the property. And while I know that's not completely the jurisdiction has been entered into public record and discussed at this table. However, to my knowledge, those gaps are not shown on the plan.
Right there.
I think this might be a revised plan, Jeff.
Yeah.
Revised
Perhaps.
today.
Oh, I don't know about,
No,
No,
a couple
I
of
think it
weeks
was
ago.
July 12th.
Okay, so I've actually looked at these, the revised plans, and I did not see any gaps.
They're
Good.
highlighted by the arrows right there. There's
Can you
one right
zoom in,
there
Mark?
and one right there.
Oh, yeah, you can see it.
yeah, there you go.
Okay, I can't actually, but I'm gonna believe you
Come
guys.
on up, come on up.
Okay.
You see it here,
Okay,
There's a note,
And-
there's a notation.
and then up here.
okay, terrific. That's wonderful. Thank you for
Sure.
commenting that. I would also just offer that there were 8 of your neighbors who are going to really appreciate that accommodation. So
Yeah.
that's terrific, but also who expressed concern just about a 6-foot stockade fence. I know when we talked about it, and I believe you spoke with other people, you indicated you weren't intending to put a stockade fence entirely around your property. However, these plans do show that. However, you're also indicating that you're going to continue to allow the neighbors to walk through that trail.
Right.
Okay, so it's unfortunate that it's a 6-foot high stockade fence in an area that has no fencings like that, but to each his own, I guess. But you've heard from your
Well,
neighbors that
I've
they're
heard,
chagrined about that plan.
sure, and each to his own, as you say. So it's also, so I've listened to you, Jeff, and to the other neighbors. And so that's why the gaps are in the fence to allow
that.
people to continue traversing through my property. And in addition to that, it's going to be an olive drab or some sort of greenish painted fence so that it's not obvious and it blends into the environment.
Thank you.
Thank you, Jeff. Do you see any other comments?
If anybody has a comment, if you could,
Yeah.
yes, Mr. Tull.
Hi, thanks. Yes, I'm 86 Farmers Cliff, so just down the road from Jeff. And I do appreciate the gaps in the fence. Thank you for accommodating that concern about the access to the trail. And just returning to the stockade fence, did you have any responses or comments to the suggestion that you consider other types of fences that are much more common in this area? Some of
Yeah,
the
Jim, I guess, just speaking plainly about NRC jurisdiction. It's probably a little bit beyond our scope to have a discussion about fence and fence typology.
Right, so as far as, with the fence, what the NRC requirement is, and I can appreciate the concerns about a stockade
Absolutely.
fence,
Yeah.
but what the NRC's concerns are is that provided there is a 6-inch gap that is provided at the base of the fence to grade, that allows passage of wildlife. And that's about it. And the only jurisdiction that the NRC has is within the 100-foot buffer zone. And there's a lot of fence that's outside of that. And I would encourage, continued conversations between you and your neighbors,
Yeah.
see if there's a way to, accomplish what you're trying to accomplish and see how that can be
Any accommodation.
mutually agreed upon.
Absolutely, sure, that's reasonable.
Okay,
Any other comments?
Thank you, Jim.
Anybody else?
Feel you all set on the comment side?
I don't see any other hands raised.
All right. So Alan and Mark, would you be good? Obviously, a couple things to take a look at
Right.
from fence location, et cetera. So continue this to August 9th. Is that acceptable?
Okay.
All right.
And I think at that point, as long as we can sort of come to agreement on what gets resubmitted, that it could be a closed issue at that
Yeah.
time.
Okay.
Yeah.
Sorry, what happens at that point?
Order conditions would be ready to go at that
Okay.
point for you,
All
so
right.
we could conclude.
Okay,
We would
Yeah.
close and issue an order of conditions, provided everything was in line
right.
Yeah.
Okay.
by
sure.
what date? If it's
By
August
next
9th,
Friday.
By next Friday.
Yeah, so any plan revision should be submitted a week from
By the
this
August
coming
28th.
Friday. Yeah.
Okay. sorry, by July 28th for
July
August
28th.
9th.
Right.
Correct.
Thank you.
No, thank you, Alan.
Thank you very much.
Appreciate it.
Appreciate your time.
Likewise. All right, so moving on. Thank you, Mark. All right, so we have a closed an issue. I think we have an order of conditions prepared. Gary?
Yes. 76 Bruce Road, okay. Yeah, so this is just, I move that we close an issue, order of conditions for DEP file 1371646, which is 76 Bruce Road, with finding A, the standard conditions 1 through 20, and special conditions 21 through 56.
Bill, get a second?
I second it.
Thank you, sir. And the vote, Bill?
Aye.
Gary?
Aye.
Nick?
Aye.
And I am an aye as well. All right, COCs, Delia.
Emergency certification.
Oh.
Yes, that's on the agenda.
Oh, thank you. Thank you.
Thank you,
Emergency
Gary. I look at my
certification.
notes. So Middlesex School is continuing to have flooding issues in the theater building now from more beaver dams that are being constructed
Huh.
downstream of Bateman's Ponds. And Bert and I went and took a look at it. There's water seeping up. It's coming into their electricals in the
Oh,
stage lift.
shoot.
So if I think they're not, I think they're like practice dams.
Mm.
So the emergency certification is just to breach those
Yeah.
to reduce the flow.
Okay. All right, you wanna, and that needs a vote.
Yes,
Is there a vote?
to ratify that emergency cert.
So I move that we issue an emergency certification to the Middlesex School, 1400 Lowell Road for beaver dam maintenance.
Second.
All right, and the vote, Bill?
Aye.
Gary?
Aye.
Nick?
Aye.
And I am an aye as well. Now,
No.
COC.
This is for pond management. It is a fairly old permit. And they are interested in continuing to do pond management. And we'll be submitting a new notice of intent to do that.
Okay,
Yeah,
but in the meantime, we're good on this one.
Yeah.
Okay. So we'll need a vote on this. Yeah,
I move that we close, or it's not even close, it's just issue a COC for the Nurse Snack Hill Association off College Road, DEP file 137638.
I second that.
and the vote.
Aye.
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 Nick? And I am an aye as well. All right. Other business. All right, so we've got two conservation restriction acceptances, right? And I think they're both prepared,
Mhm.
right?
Yes, and
All
I
right.
see that Rachel Watsky, who is the
Mhm.
attorney for Hope Beckman, who's also on the call, they're both here. And Rachel, if you want to give a very brief overview of these CRs, or I can. Oh,
Sure, Rachel.
Hi, Rachel.
Certainly. Good afternoon. My name is Rachel Watsky from Watsky Law. I am one of the attorneys who is working on this project. I was briefly involved during the permitting of the project, but one of the conditions in the SOC was for a conservation restriction across what is now 2 parcels. Initially, this was one much larger parcel and has been subdivided and homes built on it. I can share a CR plan if needed. I don't know if you have it in front of you, but the majority of both of the parcels is now going to be within the bounds of the conservation restriction. The granite bounds with a pheno marker have been placed along each of the property boundaries to demarcate the bounds of the conservation restriction. I've been able to communicate with town council and they are satisfied with any and all of the edits made. I've spoken with the EEA and received approval letters for the revisions as well. So it's basically in final form. The grantors have each signed the specific CR. If you have any questions, I'm happy to answer them as needed.
Thank you, Rachel. Yeah, I saw the minor modifications seem to just clarify,
The ones I sent you.
Yes. this afternoon.
Yes,
Yeah.
yes.
That-
Those were very minor and insubstantive. I would just point out one of the CRs covers 1.06 acres and the second is over 8.58 acres.
Mhm.
And it is adjacent to an existing conservation restriction there, the
That
Woodgate
whole
CR.
back section along the railroad
Just the
track.
whole back section.
Mhm.
There does seem to be one area that's outstanding that's,
Hmm.
you know, adjacent to Route 2 almost.
What do you mean outstanding?
Well, that's not under conservation
Yeah.
restriction. Is that private land? Is that owned by this Hosmer Meadow Association? or
No,
is
it's
it-
not owned by Hosmer Meadow. I can look up.
Yeah,
who
no,
owns
I'm
that.
Yeah, it's
Curious.
curious. I noticed that too, yeah.
No, actually.
like, it is wetland
Yeah.
or very close to wetland. If
Yeah.
it's not wetland, then
Right,
it would be nice to,
Had the whole
right.
thing.
It is not, it's not a parcel that was
Anyway,
part of
I
the,
guess not
Mhm.
germane to this conversation. So do you want two separate motions or?
I think there should be two separate motions. They're
Yeah.
both here, staff recommendations. The
just
only,
no, just, yes, the
you just don't want to quote what's in
assessor's parcel.
the parens. You can leave out on both. Okay.
Okay. So I move that we approve and accept a conservation restriction over 1.06 acres of land at 24 McCullough Lane from Cuca Road LLC, granted on June 5th, 2023, shown as conservation restriction area on Lot 1 of a plan titled Plan of Land in Concord, Mass. For Cuca Road LLC, last revised June 14th, 2023, pursuant to Massachusetts General Law, Section 31 through 33 of Chapter 184. And I move to recommend approval of this conservation restriction to the Concord Select Board.
I second that.
And we'll take the vote. Bill,
Aye.
Gary,
Aye.
Nick,
Aye.
and I am an I as well.
And the second motion, was it also last revised June 14th? Yeah, okay. I move that we approve and accept a conservation restriction over 8.58 acres of land at 38 McCullough Lane from Morgan Burks Kettler Irrevocable Trust, granted on June 5th, 2023, shown as conservation restriction area on Lot 2 on a plan titled Plan of Land in Concord, Massachusetts for Cuca Road LLC, last revised June 14th, 2023, pursuant to Massachusetts General Law, Section 31 through 33 of Chapter 184. And I move that we recommend approval of this conservation restriction to the Concord Select Board.
I second that.
In the vote, Bill,
Aye.
Gary,
Aye.
Nick,
Aye.
and I am an I as well.
So Gary, in answer to your question, this parcel here, just move this out of the way. This is the Hosmer Meadow
Yeah.
extent. And that, most of that was placed under, that's 38 McCallum. And then
Yeah.
this one is privately owned by the owner at 844 Main Street.
Yeah, I see that.
So it's just got, this is, the house is probably up here.
So
with-
that
There's a house right there.
owns all that
Yeah.
land.
Yeah.
Okay,
Interesting.
I'm pretty sure it's all wet.
yeah,
Uh,
so they can't develop it anyway,
Right.
so it'll
Yeah.
probably just stay.
Might be their benefit to have
Yeah.
a conservation restriction on it.
Yeah,
Yeah, I don't know.
okay, so,
I'm
Okay.
gonna value it, so who knows?
Yeah.
Yeah. All right.
Thanks for that, though.
did you ask for public comment?
Mm.
I did not. But why not? Right?
Mhm.
Any public comment regarding those easements? I mean, excuse me, those conservation restrictions? Great. Seeing none, I think we are closed on that issue.
Right.
All right.
Thank you so
Judy,
much. Okay, thank you. Have a
you're
good evening.
welcome.
Yeah,
Right.
Thanks, Rachel.
fine.
So Delia, a little background on 649 and 657 Sudbury. I think
Yes.
we've read it, but
Hmm.
just a
So,
touch on
right, so there was a violation of tree clearing that was conducted in the early 2000s, where an owner cleared several acres of a view, partially within a view easement to the Sudbury River, and then he sold the property.
What does
And
it mean partially within, he had a view easement?
he had, there is a view easement
Okay.
that you were obviously need, it's probably granted decades
Yeah,
ago.
yeah, yeah.
But
He
he
broadened it.
He brought, okay.
he
So he went-
cleared within and outside of the easement. It was
Okay.
not like totally within.
Yep.
And so it was obviously a violation. There was an enforcement order that was issued. There was a settlement agreement that was entered into, and there was an easement that was drafted and recorded that allowed the ability of the NRC to go and ensure that restoration activities were taking place. As part of the settlement agreement, there was $75,000 given to the town to make sure that the restoration activities were undertaken.
Yeah.
And there was some work that occurred in the early 2000s with some, plans that were prepared by a consultant or two consultants and some activities. But not much was done. And then that was two people before me. One guy was just here for 6 months. But so it was, now the owner is looking to sell the property and they have this easement that is recorded and that provides a lien on the title. And so they're looking to have that released. And the money then that is, in an escrow account would be used for other conservation purposes. Like I'm always trying to cobble money together for old calf pasture restoration for the invasive.
Because the money is not needed for,
Oh, so, okay, so Bert and I went out and we took a look at it
20 years later.
20 years later.
and
And it is, saplings and small trees have grown up.
okay.
The understory is there and it's primarily invasive. 75,000, actually the account now stands at $85,000, $85,950. But still, that amount of money to restore that wouldn't even come close. And on either side of the easement or the cleared area, rampant invasives. And so it does not, I think, make any sense.
Self-defeating, really, right?
Right. So we've talked to town council, we've talked with the homeowner, and they agree that it makes more sense to put this towards actual restoration projects that are feasible and achievable. And so that would be the proposal.
And one question, Delia, it sounds like the current owners haven't done anything to the view easement that is, if you will, legal as well, right?
Say that again?
In other words, there
Is
was a
there still
view
a
easement.
view or did that grow in?
Is that view easement that was allowed for decades?
Yes,
That's just growing in at this point as well.
it is.
Okay, so
But
they
it
haven't taken
was-
any action at all on the view easement
No,
whatsoever?
they
Yeah.
haven't, and
Okay.
it was fully grown in, like I'd have to look back to see when the view easement was issued, but it
Mhm.
was when 20 years ago, when it was cleared, there was no view until it was cleared,
I see. So it was really not an active view easement until that
until,
major
right.
act.
And I think in the winter you could probably see the river, but
Mhm.
not
No.
when we were out in June and.
But so what are we releasing? Like, are we,
So the
if we
easements-
release whatever you're proposing tonight,
Yes,
somebody else buys it, do they still have the right to cut down?
no,
this
well,
easement?
the easement, so the view easement
Yeah.
is not being annulled. What is being annulled is there's an easement
Yeah, for
access.
of access.
Yeah.
That allows the commission access to the property in order to ensure that these restoration activities are occurring.
Yeah, I'm just wondering, like, what happens if we annul our
That
easement,
easement,
the house sells?
Yep.
A new owner comes in and clear cuts the view easement, because they have the right to do that.
they
Right.
don't, because it's out of compliance with wetlands regulations. I mean, they would have to come and seek permission to do that clearing.
Even within the. view
Even with a,
easement?
oh, yeah,
Oh, yeah, that makes sense, right? Because any work they have to undertake in the wetlands, they'd have to go through an NOI, right? In terms of
Correct.
process
Right.
and how they're gonna do it.
and maybe that,
And
that's
what,
it.
and what are our options at that point? I'm just trying to think ahead,
yes,
but the disposition of $85,000 and like, if they come in and they decide to do this and they submit a plan,
yes.
would we have options to require mitigation or anything like that if they're, yeah,
They
so.
would be fully subject to the
Yeah.
Wetlands Protection Act.
Yeah. That's
There
what I was
is-
thinking.
So I think the,
Question.
the answer would be
Yeah.
not
maybe
100 feet, because the
Right.
100-foot inner riparian zone is a no-touch zone for an
Yeah.
undeveloped site.
So
So
it's almost like
you,
it's,
you could seek permission in the outer riverfront,
but you're not gonna get that vista. That might be,
right?
they may not do it. Yes, Nick?
Is there a map of this or something? I have no sense of, what would be jurisdictional if someone came in and wanted to do something in the future?
Yeah, let me just pull something up here.
I mean, I don't mean to belabor it. I'm just trying to figure out what is the most productive use of $85,000. Would it be, more invasive removal in the old calf pasture, or is this going to become sort of a problem that will need resources?
You mean this area?
Yeah, yeah.
I think in an early conversation, it sounded like there's so much invasive on the abutting properties that you could try to clear this one and
Yeah.
3 years later,
Gonna
it's,
come right back.
Yeah,
Both,
right.
both sides are.
you can't, yeah, you can't fight
Yeah.
the wave. There you go.
Okay, so you can actually see this was the clear cut area.
Oh, look at that.
Kidding.
Nope.
Huh.
Where's the house?
House is here.
Okay,
That's a heck of a stretch.
It's
It
a
is,
long
especially when-
channel
when
right
it-
through the.
It's not, yeah, very
It
odd.
sounds like they went across another property too.
They
Yeah.
cross water department land.
Ah,
They had an easement.
other property.
It's, I don't know if the easement, let me see if I can turn that layer on. It was, yeah, I mean, it
Yeah,
was. it
so
was
somehow
fine.
they had it grandfathered in from. Wow, okay. But yeah, it's looking right down the river. that whole
Yeah, you can
channel.
see why, at least you
Okay.
get a broad run of the vista, but boy, that's a. That's a tight focus that distance away.
Yeah. It's like a hole in the tree. It's like, if you have a
Yeah.
telescope, you can.
I mean,
So
that's gotta
these-
be 1,000 feet.
You find
into the
it-
river.
Yeah, I'll tell you what the
Is that the
distance, these two purples are view easements and the distance of the clearing was, let's say it stopped there. Who said 1,000?
Pretty good.
That's
wow.
1,060.
Wow.
Yeah.
Huh.
Really something.
so back to Gary's question. So if someone in the future bought the property and they wanted to clear, what would be jurisdictional land? What would
Purple.
be the
The
purple
purple line
line
is
between
the
there and the
200
river?
Actually, I'm sorry, no, it's gonna be far more than that. Let me get the wetlands layer.
Oh, because it's river. So
Yeah.
it's
Yeah.
200 feet,
200
right?
It's 200 feet and that is the 200-foot line, but the wetland
Oh.
jurisdiction is the yellow.
Ah,
Oh,
It's pretty high.
I think
it's
it
much
could-
more.
I think it could be even more than that. When we were
Really?
out there
Yeah.
up to like that backyard where it dropped down, that was all wet.
Yeah.
So
Wow.
you can be tight to the yard.
Yeah.
Right?
Right.
so Nick, all of it is jurisdictional.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, okay,
There'd
must
be a
all be
massive
floodplain,
amount of
too.
mitigation that would be.
yeah.
Another
Yeah.
shot, you could mitigate it, look fairly planted beyond the yard proper or the house proper. Although, who knows, it's such a small.
Yeah.
area.
Okay, that answers my question. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Good question, Nick.
Hmm.
All right, so any,
Yeah, no, that's all.
you,
So how do we proceed? What do we do? We're doing
You
a
have a-
release of a temporary
Sorry, you have a vote.
we have a record vote here
Yeah.
on the
to-
back side.
Yeah,
on the back side of this.
and you might want to see if there's public comment.
Yes, I will.
Yeah.
But that's what we're trying to see if we can.
Yeah.
Pass this evening.
Right.
Right, all right. Any public comment regarding the lifting of the NRC easement, if you will, from the property? I don't see any. All right,
So you should just read the record of vote.
I think so.
Sorry.
All right,
Sorry.
that's okay.
Starting at the top.
Starting at the top, July 19th in 2023. This is the record of the vote of the Town of Concord's Natural Resources Commission. At a duly called public meeting of the Town of Concord Natural Resources Commission, herein after the commission on July 19th, 2023. The commission voted as follows with regards to a grant of easement affecting the property known as 649 Sudbury Road, Concord, Massachusetts. The site dated April 18th, 2002, and recorded with the Middlesex South District Registry of Deeds at book 35301, page 75, the grant of easement. 1. As of the date hereof, the commission has not filed nor does intend to file a notice of intent to obtain an order of conditions to perform restoration at the site as described in the grant of easement. Number 2, the enforcement order dated March 1st, 2002, referenced in the grant of easement is no longer necessary. 3, the terms of the settlement agreement referenced in the grant of easement are fully satisfied and no further action by the commission is contemplated relative to said agreement. 4, the commission does not intend to use the temporary easement rights established by the grant of easement. And 5, the commission does irrevocably relinquish, extinguish, discharge, and release all of its rights, title, and interest in and to the site as set forth in the grant of easement to the extent permissible by law.
Second. Thank you, Gary. And the vote.
Aye.
Gary,
Aye.
Nick,
Aye.
and I am an aye as well. All right. Down to administrative approvals. Bert?
Which one we got first? Spencer Brook, they have 4 large white pines that are not in great health that they'd like to remove from the outer buffer zone. With the stumps remaining in place. And we talked about some replacement trees as well, so.
And they're good with the replacement?
Yep.
On a 1-to-1 or?
Yep.
Okay, great. Yep, thank you.
Yep. 228 Hunters Ridge Road, they have 1 very large white pine that they'd like to remove. And then a Norway maple and another dead white pine that's actually already fallen and it's leaning. We spoke with them about leaving a snag.
And they're
12
good-
feet, maybe more.
They're good
Was
with
it
that?
Yeah, they just want to get it so it's
Safe.
not gonna fall in the
Yeah.
house. So they don't care how big it is, as long as it's not gonna fall in the house.
Okay, good.
That's great.
That's in outer buffer zone, also in riverfront area.
And then the last one is at the second division well, the town has 3 large pine trees that they're concerned about falling on the well house. Outer buffer zone and outer riverfront. So they would just remove, they're not proposing to replant, but it is a heavily wooded area.
Okay.
It's lovely. Never been there before.
Oh, is that right?
Huh.
Gorgeous.
Ah,
Yeah. Yep.
all right. So those are all good.
Mhm.
All right.
Good.
Great. So I think with that, business is done, meeting is adjourned.